First, I'm going to create a VPC and set the NAT gateways to 0 because they are quite expensive and I won't actually need one for this video. Now I want to create a database instance inside my VPC and I'm going to place it inside a public subnet. It goes without saying that you should not do this in production. I'm just doing it so that I have easy access to the database. I want to enable IAM Authentication. This will enable the mapping of IAM users to database users. I think credentials are self-explanatory. We need a way to access the database without the IAM token. So this will allow me to use the username and password. For this example, I chose the Postgres database, but we could use MySQL as well. Last but not least, I chose to change the default removal policy to destroy because normally AWS would create a snapshot before destroying the database, which is fine, but then AWS also charges for the storage of the snapshot, which I don't actually need and I'd rather save some money. And then one last important detail, when setting up a database, we need to configure a security group. So I'm gonna allow for any IP because this is a public database. So the main point of using IAM authentication for the database, in my opinion, would be to leverage the IAM policies to control access to database resources. So that's why I'm creating an ARN for the RDS DB service. And the resource I want to use is the DB user in the database instance that I just created. And the actual resource I want to use is the admin user. I'm also gonna need a user that I can attach a policy to, so I'm gonna get him from my AWS account. And then I'm gonna attach an inline policy that will allow him to connect to a database. And then as the resource, I'm gonna specify the ARN I just created. So the user will only be allowed to connect to this database if it has the username admin on it. And that's pretty much it for the CDK side of things. I just need to deploy the stack now. Let's jump into the console and see if the database was created. Yeah, okay, I have it. So now I'm gonna go see the secrets manager, which should have all the credentials needed to access the database. So I want to use these now to access the database, create the database user, and then enable IAM authentication for that user. If you are tempted to do this for the Postgres user instead, just keep in mind that enabling IAM authentication overrides the default password. So this password from the secret will no longer work because it's not a valid IAM token, which is now required to access the database. As you can see, this is a completely empty database. I'm just gonna create a new user called admin because that is what I defined when I created the ARN in the CDK stack. And then I'm gonna assign it RDS IAM role, which enables IAM authentication for that specific user. And that's it. Before moving on, I want to test if this actually works. But first, I'm gonna set up a variable for RDS host because it's a very long string and I don't want to have to use it all the time in my commands. And then I'm gonna do the same for IAM token because it also generates a very long string. We're gonna use the AWS CLI to generate the auth token, and I'm gonna need the host name, a port for the database, region, and the username. And now with that out of the way, I can actually try and authenticate into the database. Keep in mind that the IAM token needs to be regenerated every now and then because I think it's valid for 15 minutes. Okay, that worked. I'm actually inside the database. Okay, so the database is configured for IAM authentication, and now I can see how to create a database client in the code. I'm gonna use Postgres.js and Drizzle for this. So first thing, I'm gonna change this user type into a database enum, and then define the users table. This is gonna be a very simple model. We're gonna have an ID, that's gonna be a primary key. Then I want to have a name, a phone number, and a type. And here I can use the database enum that I created as a column type, which is pretty cool, to be honest. I also want to update this helper function to use the user type enum properly. And with this model done, I need to set up drizzle config to be able to create migrations. So I'm gonna create the drizzle config.js file, and it's gonna be a very simple setup. We need to point to the schema. In this case, it's just gonna be this users.js file. I wanna have the migrations inside the database migrations, and I'm using a Postgres driver. Now in the CLI, I'm gonna go to the app directory and use the drizzle-kit generate command to create new migrations. Okay, it didn't see any schema changes. Okay, that's because I did not export the table and the enum I created. So let's try again. Okay, and now it says that it created one table and one enum, and it's all inside this SQL file. To run this migration, I first have to set up a connection to the database. So I'm gonna need some basic info like the host and the port number. The username is gonna be admin, and the password is actually gonna be an async function where we're gonna generate the IAM token. And I want to limit this to just one connection. Now underneath, I'm gonna define a function that will run the drizzle migrator. And then after the migration is done, I want to close the connection and run the function. To generate the token, I'm using the AWS SDK. So this works very similar to the AWS CLI. All I need to do is just point it to the database and give it a username. And then the signer object has a method for generating the token. And that's it. Now again, back in the CLI, I'm gonna run the script with Node. Okay, it says that it can't find journal JSON, which I can see I have. This is usually an issue with the file path. So, okay, now it says that permission is denied, which is strange because I accessed the database from the CLI and it was fine. Okay, so I looked around and I couldn't find a reason why this is happening. The error says that it's a permission problem, so the only workaround I found was to grant super user to admin to just move forward. This is not an ideal solution, but it's the only one I found for now. If I ever find something else, I'm gonna update this part. Yeah, so now I run the migration and it seems to be working. I'm gonna go inside the database and make sure that the table was created. Okay, it's here and I can select from it. It has the columns that I defined, so it's all good. So now I want to create a database client that I'll be able to use in the code, not just for migrations. So I'll copy the migrate code and just change it a little bit because I don't need to limit the connection to just one. And then I'm gonna wrap it with the drizzle client. The thing is to change the router implementation to use the database. So I'm gonna create a new user using the helper function and then insert it into the database using the drizzle database client. And I'm gonna use it to select all the users as well. Okay, so let's test this now. I'm gonna start creating some users. Let's see in the database. Yeah, this is definitely this database, and let's delete all the users that are not admins. And now in the app, it displays only admins, so it works. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching.